I'm very happy. Okay, recording in progress. I'm very happy to speak to you, my fellow alumni, and everyone who is joining this meeting. It's a bit of a challenge for me because it's the first time that I'm participating in a skill building workshop. I've given a lot of different presentations before due to my work and in regards to the war situation, but this is the first time in this kind of format. So please help me with your questions and whatever you feel like asking, I'm happy to answer to any questions. I'll maybe introduce myself a bit more so that you know what I'm doing. I'm a Ukrainian journalist and local producer. The second part of my title comes since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Since I've been working as a journalist after I graduated E.MA in 2018, I worked in a Ukrainian NGO that tackled Russian disinformation, media communication, propaganda, and all this kind of stuff. I worked there as an analyst, journalist, project coordinator, all kinds of jobs. But when the full-scale invasion began, and my primary task was to help foreign media working in Ukraine because there was like a flood of foreign journalists who didn't know anything about the country. And in this kind of messed up situation, they were searching for locals, especially local journalists who could have helped them to cover the war. So I started working with the American Public Radio NPR. As a local producer, I was assisting them with topics, research, finding contacts, conducting interviews, doing some background check and stuff like this, arranging stories. And that's how I began my journey of a local producer. Then I worked with some other media on a freelance basis. And in summer 22, I had a total burnout. And eventually, after a month of rest, I switched back to journalism myself. And I joined the team of the Kyiv Independent, which is an independent media about Ukraine in English. I highly recommend everyone to follow it because it's a real quality journalism about Ukraine. So I was working with them. Then I had a fellowship with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in Prague and in Kiev. And since basically 2025, mid 2025, or even 24, I was working purely as a freelance independent journalist and local producer, working both for myself, for my own content, as well as helping other journalists who arrived to Ukraine, also documentary filmmakers. Recently, I've been working with a few documentary projects, and that's basically my job for the past years. So I am a journalist by education. My first master's was journalism, and then I did a second master's in human rights and democratization, which really helped me shape my focus. And by my work and experience, I'm a journalist too. So I'll be happy to receive any questions regarding that area of expertise, if we can say so. Maybe Marlus, you have some questions regarding our topic of discussion so that I have like some point to start. If not, I'll just speak randomly about my experience. We don't hear you.
Sorry, it's the classical to stay on mute. Um, well, of course, if you want to go ahead, it's fine with me, but otherwise, we will be curious if you can share some experience, like how the war in Russia has reshaped your work,
Mhm.
if it did, and if you also feel like being under threat by Russia in your work.
Mhm. Of course, it's totally reshaped my work, the work of all Ukrainian journalists and all Ukrainians, I would say, even like any kind of civilians who had some peaceful life and normal jobs. The full-scale war impacted all of us severely. Regarding my work, I vividly remember the last few months before the start of the full-scale invasion, and it started to change even then because when I started working as a journalist after E.MA, within this NGO where I was an analyst, journalist, videographer, project coordinator, I was doing so much stuff. I was still covering Ukraine and things related to the war since we had war since 2014. Russia intervened in the east of Ukraine and invaded Crimea. So there was a lot of work to do. I was trying to focus myself on human rights issues, covering IDPs, covering what was going on the occupied territories, transitional justice, things that I've learned during the E.MA program, which helped me a lot, like to find topics and to understand how to shape them. But that was not comparable to what was coming in 2022. I could still cover culture before 2022, like social political issues, internal things that were like might have been of interest for English-speaking audience. So I was writing in English and doing videos in English as well. But I remember when we started to receive a lot of news about Russia accumulating troops at the border with Belarus and on the Eastern Front, that the news were escalating day by day, and I was busy like updating the website with all this news, and it became really distressing at some point. And I was about to quit my job because I thought whether the if the full-scale invasion doesn't happen, at least I would have an opportunity to rest and go on vacation, which didn't happen. So I quit my job, but eventually I immediately started working with American journalists who arrived prior to the full-scale invasion in January. And they were very alarmed about the situation. They were warning me, all the Ukrainians, like especially their team who was working with them, that it's going to happen. We didn't believe them, but it happened. And since then, my work drastically changed. And just because, first of all, I was working for, like, I was an experienced, like, more or less experienced journalist. I knew my country, but I was working for other journalists who arrived, and that kind of reshaped my approach to work because I had to provide them a lot of context, a lot of knowledge about the country. Second of all, I had a lot of stress and psychological, how do you say, processing of what was happening. Even though I didn't have much time, it was a war in my country that really impacted me as any other citizen deeply. I realized that only a few months later when I stopped working and I completely crashed because I didn't have time to process what was happening. But I remember when I was like ending my days after like long days of work with American journalists, I would just go to my room and like before sleep, I would look at the news and cry. So it was really distressing. And I would say every year it was distressing in a different way, to a different level. There were a lot of events happening that you cannot process immediately and that stays somewhere in the background of your mind. So it's also, I think, throughout these years, we as Ukrainian journalists learned maybe that you cannot work to your full extent all the time, expecting like to do great things nonstop without pausing and provide like delivering the quality content without taking care of yourself. It's impossible on the long run. So I think we learned it in a hard way, also to take care of ourselves, like to find some, we call it war-life balance. There's a work-life balance, but in our situation, we find a war-life balance, which sounds really strange, but that's unfortunately how we've been living for the past 5 years. And yeah, my work completely changed. I would say that it also speeded up things that I would like to do before the full-scale invasion. Since I dreamt of working for foreign media prior to 2022, but that's not the way how I imagined it. And eventually, when there's such a full-scale war, so much pain, stress, very like full of things full of sorrow fill your life, all your achievements become like empty. It doesn't bring you any pleasure. So that's also something that I would say personally me realized while working after the full-scale invasion began, that it's hard to understand whether what you're doing is actually having any value and any impact, and it doesn't bring you like any feeling of achievement or feeling of accomplishment. It's like a constant quest, a constant marathon that we run, and you don't see the end. So that's also like a psychological challenge in this regard. And there's a factor of security, of course, like working as a journalist in Ukraine, due to all the bombings. I don't know, I'm not even speaking about going to the front line. I'm just speaking about like working as a journalist in Kiev or in a rear city. There's always a danger that you can be just randomly killed as any other citizen. And we had such examples, unfortunately, of journalists dying in their own apartment because of Russian missiles and drones. And there's another level when you want to cover frontline villages or towns or some deoccupied territories. There's like a multifaceted uh, issue here with security, mining, drones, artillery. I don't know, sabotage from Russian agents, all kinds of things, digital security as well. So yeah, it's a very challenging environment. In addition to the fact that journalism per se is not an easy job, and it adds like the war just adds a lot of mental and physical load to the already difficult work.
And can you give some examples of these political restraints also coming from Russia, apart from threats? And how you deal with them, how you try to counter them?
Um, I think none of the Ukrainians now care about political restraints from Russia because, I mean, there's no point. They can kill you sending a missile or a drone. So political restraints don't matter. Like they're attacking the country. But if we're speaking about political restraints inside Ukraine, like as journalists working in Ukraine covering the war, there are a lot of security restrictions that are normal during a wartime. And for some journalists, especially working in the front line, it's a restriction that impacts their work and it can be frustrating. And we know cases when some journalists were given more access than others. Some, like many foreign journalists, were, for example, complaining that you cannot go everywhere freely because of like bureaucracy, like applying for accreditation and things like this. But of course, these measures, to a large extent, are justified because, first of all, it's about security of a journalist. We have a lot of cases by now when journalists were killed in the front line by Russian drones or missiles. And none of the restrictions can actually save you from that, but I think the government is trying to imply some limitations so that these cases are not too widespread. But also, it's also about the security of military who are defending the country and who are very vulnerable to any kind of leaked secret information. Let's say if a journalist does not comply with the rules of covering I don't know, the work of some unit that works with artillery, and he doesn't blur certain images or numbers, and then the Russians see the report and they target the position. That's a very realistic threat that's been there for like 5 years. We've had cases when foreign journalists were deprived of accreditation because they didn't follow the rules, and they endangered military personnel, and soldiers were killed because of the journalistic reports. So, like, we know that these measures are justified. There are things that are not so justified. There's a lot of bureaucracy, of course, but I think it's also in any kind of war, bureaucracy is there because that's an army. Like when you have an army, you have a bureaucracy, and a lot of things can be frustrating, but in the end of the day, many limitations are justified and reasonable, both for the security of civilians, for the security of military, and for journalists themselves. We do have some state media, for example, United 24, that is the media created by Zelensky's team to like speak about Ukraine in English for foreign audiences. And it's not like an independent media. They do have some privileges. They can access some things that other journalists cannot access. So that is frustrating. Of course, like by any standards, that shouldn't be the case. But otherwise, we do have also a lot of independent reporters. Luckily, we still have a lot of foreign journalists who are coming, and they can go to the front line, and they can do things that they want to do while applying the rules, not to endanger other people while reporting. Last winter, I had an opportunity to work with some German documentary filmmakers, and they were trying to tell me, like they were asking me, why don't we see any reports from Ukraine? Why don't we see any videos from Ukraine? I said, well, I don't speak German. I cannot like tell you how much of reporting you have, but if you want to go to the front line, it's possible. But it's your own responsibility how you take care of your own security. And they said, no, we don't see any videos. Maybe Ukraine is censoring journalists. Maybe like it's not possible to go to the front line. Maybe they don't want to show how it actually is. And I think it's also a matter of anyone's personal level of resilience, because not everyone can go to the front line, but it's also the person's own responsibility, and maybe the reason why some people see more content from their own country than the others, than from other countries, are also like the restrictions that foreign media are putting on their own journalists. Many companies do not allow their journalists to go to the front line because they don't want to take responsibility for someone's life. And I do know a lot of foreign journalists in Ukraine who don't go to the front line because their company forbid them to leave Kyiv, like to go anywhere outside of Kyiv, because it's a real like danger. If you go to the front line, you can be killed by a drone even on the way, and nobody will help you. So, and these kind of restrictions exist, as well as regarding like internal coverage. If you talk about issues like in the Ukrainian army, which we do have, or about corruption cases, I would say Ukraine is on a good path of a democratic country. We luckily we are still a democracy, and throughout these years of war, Ukrainian civil society proved that it's quite strong and it's able to resist political pressure, even under these strained conditions of Russian warfare, which makes everything difficult, which makes like any kind of democratic progress or human rights defense difficult, because if you gather on a protest, for example, you are an easy target for Russia. And last summer, for instance, we had huge protests around Ukraine against a government decision to erase anti-corruption bodies that are independent. And we had crowds of people even in frontline cities like Kharkiv, which is 30 kilometers away from the front line. Hundreds of students, hundreds of young people just went out to protest against corruption. And eventually these bodies, like anti-corruption bodies, were not destroyed. So we do have a strong civil society, luckily, for now, and we can speak about things like corruption, issues in the army, mobilization problems, and things like this. And that's why I think Ukraine is fighting so avidly in this war against Russia, because people just don't want to become Russia or Belarus in this regard.
Thanks a lot. We also have one question from Sufyan in the chat. I can read it, but Sufyan, if you want to ask Iryna yourself, please unmute yourself and feel free to.
Yes, thanks a lot, and hello everybody. It's just my question is just it's a matter of more like an advice. Like I was saying, like given Ukraine's experience with war and far right disclosure, what lessons can the Iraqi journalist apply to protect press freedom while countering extremist narrative in our own conflict context? So anything similar will be great, because I mean, we have something similar. Maybe not direct war yet, but hope not. But this is also a challenge for us. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. To be honest, I'm not very much acquainted with the current Iraqi context, but judging from the general perspective of this question, I would say that the main tool to counter any extremist narratives in any war zones, any conflict situations, is just to stick to facts, fact-checking, data, to speak the truth. I don't think that we as journalists, or maybe not even journalists, have to counter any kind of propaganda or disinformation with the same approach. Countering propaganda with propaganda is a bad idea. Countering disinformation with disinformation is also a bad idea. So, but of course, if you just use facts and independent approach, if you just operate facts, it can be frustrating against the flow of narratives that are multiplied by extremist groups, far right, or in our case, Russian propaganda, for example, that is very widespread, not only in Ukraine, but around Europe and in the world in general. Unfortunately, we don't have many means rather than facts and data journalists. I think, actually, I'm not a data journalist, but I think data journalism is very powerful. And basically, what I see in Ukraine, it becomes like a real tool to counter also AI-generated content and things that are aggravated by social media. Because when you speak with numbers, like when you provide, like, for example, we had a case of fake news and manipulative content fueled by Russia about migrants in Ukraine, that are they're going to destroy everything, they're going to replace Ukrainians and things like this. And it was proven that these accounts that were spreading this information were linked to Russia, and these data journalists provided numbers, actual numbers, how many migrants arrived to Ukraine, how many can we host, how much they earn, and things like this. They were debunking things that were circulating in the social media, playing on people's fear. And it worked. Like, this discourse calmed down. So I think sticking to facts is the best strategy in this case, but also there should be some government program for education and critical thinking, because I think that's the root of all the problems in the society, and I see it in Ukraine as well. There should be like education on media literacy, because many people are just consuming things on Telegram, TikTok, Instagram, and X in the best case. But like if we keep promoting independent media and teaching people how to consume information, because it's not just about scrolling, there's a less chance that people will fall into the narratives or disinformation of extremist groups. But unfortunately, these groups exist in every society, and even now we see that even Western democracies are not immune to this. So everyone is struggling. And there are always people who will spread these extremist ideas. In this regard, I would also like to, I have a book here that I've read recently. It's called Autocracy Inc. by E.MAlumni, and I really recommend it to everyone. And there's like one passage, if you allow me to read. Sorry for the lecturing, but I really like this book, and it's sometimes it's a bit obvious, but it just like describes how all the far right extremist, illiberal leaders work eventually together in the world. So the problem of Iraq or Ukraine or some other country is not unique. They are all basically creating the system of illiberal regimes as much as democratic regimes, for example. And what I wanted to say. And there's one thing that I wanted to mention in this regard from this book. E.MAlumni says that autocratic information operations exaggerate the divisions and anger that are normal in politics. They pay or promote the most extreme voices, hoping to make them more extreme and perhaps more violent. They hope to encourage people to question the state, to doubt authority, and eventually to question democracy itself. In seeking to create chaos, these new propagandists, like their leaders, will reach for whatever ideology, whatever technology, or whatever emotions might be useful. The vehicles of disruption can be right-wing, left-wing, separatist, nationalist, even taking the form of medical conspiracies or moral panic. Only the purpose never changes. Autocracy Inc. hopes to rewrite the rules of international system itself. So yeah, it's not only the far right, for example, it's also the far left and national Christians and so on and so forth. And I think we should really look into practices of different countries, how they work with these narratives to not fall deep in the illiberal messaging and ideologies. I don't know if I answered your questions. I tried my best.
No, thank you very much. It's very it's very clear. Appreciate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Marluz, for posting all the links.
Yeah. So everyone, you can find some links to what Iryna mentioned throughout the presentation here in the chat. If there is anyone else who has a question, please feel free to ask it in the chat or by raising your hand. So please take the floor.
No questions?
No questions yet. Let's wait for a minute. Otherwise, you are also free to tell something you find really important yourself for the audience, which they should be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing with countering...
Yeah, we have a question, actually.
Someone has a question.
Bria,
okay.
Do you want to ask it yourself, or shall I ask it for you? If you want to ask it yourself, please feel free. Okay, E.MA. Do you see a point in engaging with people on the far right?
Hi, Bria. I know Bria. She's one of my friends from Lviv. She's from the US. Thank you for the question. Well, by now, I don't usually answer to these people privately, like on social media, for example. I used to do it in the beginning of the war. I was quite active on X/Twitter back then, and I would see a lot of not only far right, as I've said, but also far left attacking Ukrainians, evoking some narratives of Russian propaganda consciously or subconsciously, I don't know. I was answering to them, but to be honest, it's really draining. And in the end, people stay in their echo chambers and stick to their own opinions. I believe in these echo chambers, and that's also the reason why I don't engage so much with people on social media anymore, because you waste a lot of your time and resource, and in the end, people just believe what they want to believe. It's very rare that people change their opinions. But I think in the case of Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine, they also had enough time to make their own opinions based on what they see. We have one of the most documented war I would say, maybe in the history of the world, because we have so many technologies, like drones everywhere, flying, like filming what's going on at the front line, cameras filming what happens to civilians at every corner. We could see it with the example of Bucha, Mariupol, all the territories that were occupied by Russia. They were widely documented. Like there were so many videos and audio and pictures of Russian soldiers committing atrocities, war crimes. And yet, some people dare to say that it's fake news, that it didn't happen, that it's like, I don't know, Ukrainian propaganda, NATO propaganda, and so on and so forth. So it's really frustrating. But at this point, to be honest, they've had 5 years to make their opinion, and if they stick to their far right ideologies, I think there might be a deeper reason why they do so. It's not just about Ukraine, it's just people who adhere to illiberal values. And if they adhere to illiberal values, Ukraine doesn't fit their image of the world. They would rather support, I don't know, Trump and fighting immigration. Maybe deep inside, if you scratch a bit, they are also anti-Semite, they are also a bit pro-Russian. So I don't see the point of talking to these people. Even though as a journalist, I still see the point of covering and documenting. I think it's important to document, but not to fight personally with people who believe what they want to believe.
Thank you, Bria. And also you, Iryna, for answering this question so good. Anyone else having a question? Otherwise, I have actually one still. I recently saw a documentary of one Dutch journalist. He has been reporting on Iran a lot, on Afghanistan and Ukraine. And recently he tried to do it a bit of a different approach. And he went to Russia actually and documented what was said by the Russia. And how they perceive the war and how Russian media shapes the perception. But he said because of a lot of criticism, it was for the first time that he was like almost having the tendency to do some self-censorship. Have you ever experienced this yourself? And I see that... Oh, Sufyan, you also want to say something? Perhaps you can take this question first, and then Sufyan, I can give you the floor again.
So have I experienced self-censorship, right? Yes, I will divide this question into two parts. I'll start from the end. Have I experienced self-censorship? So that's something I also forgot to, like, I wanted to talk about it because it's also like a tricky part of covering the war in your own country. As I've said, we have freedom of expression in Ukraine. We can talk about whatever we want. As a journalist in Ukraine for the past 10 years, I haven't faced any problems or I haven't faced any like political pressure. But when you cover the war in your own country, you're always like in the background of your mind having this like silent battle of how do you say, duties, your own sentiments, your willingness to help your country, and at the same time, the journalistic ethics and journalistic standards. So I think the war has been a good test for many journalists to show how professional they are, because there are issues that are not very convenient and not very pleasant for Ukrainians, and people know about it. But if you like, if you're covering it for internal audience, it causes some strain because people are in the war situation are a bit more nervous, more reactive to things. They are more sensitive, sometimes even politically divided. So if you speak about something that is not fitting in their vision of the how things should be in the war situation, sometimes it can evoke some extra anger or aggression even. But if you're covering the war for the foreign audience, and you know that it's a just war, and you know that your country is on the brink of survival, that Russia, in our case, the aggressor country, wants to destroy your identity, to destroy, annihilate your culture, occupy the territories, and like basically destroy your life. You are thinking twice how you think, like how you write, how you shape the facts, and how you present them, because you know that sometimes it might harm the effort to defend like the country from the existing information threats like from Russia, but also real dangers on the ground. And it's like I wouldn't say that in my practice I've had a lot of such things, but for example, I'll give an example of my work with foreign journalists. Sometimes foreign journalists, because they come from an outside, they don't really care about things like security issues, like security restraints that we have. And they would say, okay, let's go outside, let's talk to people, what they think about this and that, but also let's ask them to show us where the weapons, or let's say where the grain is stored, which is being targeted by Russian missiles, because Russia has been also conducting a lot of warfare on civilians, on the logistics. They were destroying warehouses with grain. And at some point in the war, it was really like crucial to keep that information secret. But foreign journalist doesn't really care because he will leave the country. It's not his own country. As a Ukrainian journalist, I would ask people what they think on the street, because I think it's important. Like even if they say something that I don't agree with, but I wouldn't reveal. I wouldn't ask someone to show us the location that is restrained by military due to security concerns. And that's also like foreign journalists see it as a sort of censorship, because that's, to him, it's an obvious fact that needs to be reported. And to me, it's a matter of someone's life. If I know that if he reports on that fact and the missile will come in an hour or two and will kill people, that will be on my account. So this is just one of the multiple examples, but there are so many. There are so many, for example, like covering mobilization in Ukraine. We know that our army is much smaller than the Russian, and still like we're managing to hold the line. But at the same time, we have huge issues with mobilization since a lot of Ukrainian men don't want to serve, and that's a fact. But at the same time, there's an additional factor to it. There's Russian propaganda that is aggravating the issue that nobody wants to serve. So it's like constantly you have to think about multiple facts, how to report, not to make it, not to play into the Russian narrative, but at the same time report what is really going on the ground, and at the same time not to harm the war effort that is like happening on the background. It's yeah, it's something that all journalists think about, and definitely covering the war in your own country is not the easiest thing to do, and it's really draining because you have to think about your own audience in your own country, how people will perceive you, like whether they will not cancel you. That's also possible. Like people would put you on a blacklist or something in their minds, like they would label you as a propagandist or something like this. And not to play into anyone's narrative, not to harm anyone. That's a lot of issues to consider.
Thanks a lot. I saw that Sufyan has actually had a great analysis, so I can have everyone recommend reading it. It's a summary of what you said and his analysis. Fiona, can you ask the question yourself, or shall I read it?
Yeah, sure, I can ask. So, my question is, could you share where people could find some great high quality reporting on Ukraine? I guess either from media within Ukraine or foreign media. And are there any kind of particular articles or investigative pieces that stand out to you, which are really good examples?
I mean, there have been so many great reports on different things, both on the front line, on the occupied territories, on children that were kidnapped by Russia. It's just difficult to pick up one media or one report. Luckily, as I've said, we have a lot of international coverage, sometimes less, sometimes more. But I think it's also one of the issues that far left or far right like to evoke, that Ukraine war is the most documented, that it's always like on the media. We should focus on other wars, even though I don't mind focusing on other wars. I think it's important to cover any kind of conflict and humanitarian disasters. But why Ukraine war is so reported is because it's an easy, as cynical as it sounds, it's a war with easy access. It's easy to go to Ukraine. Like you just take a train from Poland, you fly to Poland from wherever you are in the world, you take a train, in a few hours you are at the border, you cross the border, nobody asks you any documents except your passport. You accredit yourself by applying for accreditation, and you cover the war. And the logistics in Ukraine works well. Like our trains are working regardless of the missile attacks, and they're always on time. The cafes, restaurants are open. People are helpful. So it's an easy war to cover. It's not like going to Gaza, for example. I went in 2023, I went to the West Bank. I didn't go to Gaza, but I went to the West Bank. And like it's much easier to come to Ukraine. It's closer and more accessible. And we have a lot of great reporting. Regarding the media, I would recommend the Kyiv Independent, as I've said, because I've worked there, even though I don't work there anymore. I think it's like really a team of professional journalists, and they are really adhering to all the journalistic standards and trying to provide the most balanced information. You can find a lot of critical reports on politics, on military structure, on abuse in the army and things like this. They're really professional. They have a good investigative team on war crimes too. And And if we speak about some international media, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe is great, especially the Ukrainian team, even though it's in Ukrainian, but sometimes the English-speaking website translates pieces from Ukraine. Any kind of big media sometimes has great reports that others cannot get, like these big media like New York Times, Washington Post not anymore. They destroyed, Jeff Bezos destroyed the team. But for example, New York Times has a great team in Ukraine. They have some quality reporting, great access. NPR, where I worked, they have a bureau in Kyiv. Actually, what changed also in the coverage of Ukraine in international media is that a lot of journalists who were based in Moscow moved their bureaus or moved to base themselves in Kyiv. And that also gave them a different perspective, because one of the problems before the full-scale war, and with which I, as a journalist, was struggling, and many Ukrainian journalists who were covering Ukraine in other languages were struggling, that foreign coverage was based in Moscow. And so all the reporting was through the Russian lens, and that really distorted the narrative. Now it's much, much better, and you can really find great reports from international media of all kinds.
Thanks, and I put some of the links to some of the media outlets in the chat, so people can read from it. At least it's very helpful for me, I must admit, because I stick to Ayasera and some Dutch newspapers, so this information is really great.
One more thing I forgot to mention. There's a new media actually called the European Correspondent. I wrote one article for them so far, together with my husband, who is also a reporter. But I think they are doing great. They are somehow similar to Kyiv Independent, but they are actually a European media. They have journalists based all around Europe in different capitals and cities, and they really try to have this modern approach to long read stories. They do some great content with the resources they have, and they gain more and more audience. And I think they're also tackling far right narratives and issues. They have a lot of both text and videos on Instagram on this topic. So I highly recommend to subscribe to them. And it's just they have a really pleasant website and very interesting topics, both lifestyle and social political things.
Thanks a million. I just looked them up and add them to the chat as well, so people can access it. We still have a few minutes left, so everyone has a last chance to ask burning questions. Otherwise, Iryna, if you want to say a final word to our audience, that will be great.
Well, let's see. If no one has a question, I don't even know what to say. No, I think it's. I think we're in a crucial moment right now. I don't. Maybe that's been said every year throughout this war, but somehow this year it feels like a crucial year for Ukraine during this war, and I think we're approaching the end at some point. Maybe if not the end of this year, maybe the beginning of the next year. But I think it's really important to focus on independent media, on balanced coverage, because if Russia is weak, it's trying to disrupt and sabotage as much as it can. And we can see by the reports about Russian incidents in Europe that they are intensifying their attacks and their interventions in elections. They are trying to enhance the power, they are trying to empower the far right in the countries that are a bit in despair, where the far right are leading polls. They are putting their feet everywhere, creating these damaging campaigns like pig heads in France, involving agents, but also involving disinformation and all kinds of resources that help them spread subtle propaganda and disinformation campaigns. And they've got really good at it because they've had 12 years of war since 2014, when nobody was paying attention. Russia was really mastering their hybrid warfare, their information campaigns. They got, maybe sometimes they can be a bit sloppy with their propaganda, but they're much wiser, internationally speaking. They use a lot of things that people take as local initiatives, and that's actually been a problem on social media as well. They create accounts that seem like local media or local influencers. That's been a big problem both on TikTok, on Instagram, Telegram channels. They write in the languages of those countries, and they play into those narratives that divide, erode the society, and can turn the tide into their favor. We can see it in France, in Germany, in countries that are currently endangered by the far right. We've seen it in Hungary. Luckily, it didn't work out. But I think we should really focus on spreading the content that is made by real journalists, by independent media, and not fall into the messaging that is sounds manipulative or emotional on social media, because that might be a trap that we don't even know about.
Thanks a million. The session is coming to an end, but I would love to thank you on behalf of the audience as well. I think all of us can tell you that it has been very informative. At least I learned a lot, but I also saw from Sufyan's analysis that he learned a lot. And I must say, I know Sufyan myself, so he's based in Iraq, so he can really take the experience shared by you to the Middle East. I hope that all others today in our meeting have got some tools from your experience or at least gained some extra knowledge. So I would love to thank everyone for joining us today. So a big applause also to you, Iryna, and thanks a million again for sharing your experience.
Thank you everyone for joining. It was, I hope it was helpful, because it was a bit sketchy on my side. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have outside of this webinar. Feel free to text me on LinkedIn or Instagram, wherever, and let's connect. Let's stay in touch. That's really valuable right now. And I saved the note from Sufyan as well. I will check it out. Thank you for the input. Thank you for inviting me as well.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Iryna, and thanks, Maria, for moderating the session. I'll end this now then, unless there's any last questions or comments. I see Anastasia also thanked you, Iryna, for the conversation and for your work.
Thank you, Anastasia. I'll see you soon, by the way.
Perfect. I'll end the call now then. Thanks again and take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye.